Every dominant monetary order vanishes the same way, not suddenly, not dramatically, but through a sequence so consistent it has repeated for thousands of years. What fails first? The empire, or the money that holds it together? Why do societies always believe they are immune to patterns history never spares? And why does the loss of trust in currency always come before political decline? From ancient Rome to imperial Spain, from Britain at the height of its global power, to every reserve currency that came before the modern dollar, the same process unfolds, quietly, predictably, relentlessly. Historians often focus on wars, leaders, or ideologies, but long before statues fall or borders change, something more fundamental breaks. Money, not its form, its credibility. In this video, we will walk through the 7 stages every empire's money passes through before the fall. Not as prophecy, as pattern. We begin at stage 10, where power feels permanent and where decline is already embedded. Those who understood this sequence were never surprised. Money is more than coins, it is trust. Every complex society runs on an invisible agreement, not law, not force, trust. Money is simply the most efficient way humans ever learned to store that trust. It allows strangers to cooperate. It allows effort today to be exchanged for value tomorrow. It allows large systems to exist at all. When money is trusted, trade expands, specialization deepens, productivity compounds. But when that trust weakens, the damage is never isolated to prices alone. Because money is not just a medium of exchange, it is a record of credibility, a promise that the future will roughly resemble the present. Throughout history, empires did not collapse because they ran out of resources. They collapsed because their monetary system stopped coordinating reality. Rome still had land. Spain still had silver. Britain still had factories. But once money stopped functioning as a reliable measure of value, economic signals distorted. Prices stopped telling the truth. Savings stopped rewarding patience. Debt stopped enforcing discipline. At that point, societies begin consuming tomorrow to stabilize today. This is why monetary decline always precedes political decline. Governments can command armies, they can pass laws, but they cannot order trust into existence. Once money begins to fail, everything built on top of it weakens, quietly at first. Contracts stretch, institutions compensate, temporary measures become permanent tools. Most people never notice this phase. Daily life still works, stores remain open, paychecks still arrive. That is what makes it dangerous. Because monetary collapse is not an event, it is a process. Trust doesn't disappear all at once. It erodes, gradually, predictably, and every empire follows the same path once that erosion begins. To understand where systems break, we have to understand how that trust is first compromised and why it always happens in stages. Every empire's fall follows the same economic script. Not because leaders make identical mistakes, not because cultures think the same way, but because the constraints are mathematical. When a monetary system succeeds, it scales. When it scales, it concentrates power. And when power concentrates, the same pressures always emerge. Across 2,000 years of recorded history, dominant empires pass through a familiar sequence. First comes monetary reliability. The currency is trusted. Trade expands. Capital flows in. Then comes expansion. Military reach grows. Administration grows. Obligations multiply. Over time, costs rise faster than productive capacity. Taxation meets resistance. Borrowing fills the gap. This is the turning point. Debt begins to replace discipline. Money creation substitutes for reform. What was once an accounting tool becomes a political instrument. At this stage, nothing appears broken. Growth continues. Markets function. Confidence remains. But the currency has shifted roles. It no longer measures value. It absorbs stress. From here, the remaining stages follow with remarkable consistency. Debasement, whether through metal reduction or balance sheet expansion. Distorted prices, asset inflation, rising inequality between those closest to the currency and everyone else. Eventually, confidence fractures. Not suddenly, selectively. Foreign creditors adjust first. Domestic savers follow later. This sequence does not require incompetence. It does not require corruption. It requires scale. Every empire believes its circumstances are unique. Every ruling class believes adjustment can be postponed. Every system assumes time will solve what structure cannot. History shows otherwise. Once money is used to delay reality rather than reflect it, the script is already in motion. Rome was the first global power to reveal this pattern in full, and it did so with extraordinary clarity. To understand the stages, we begin where monetary dominance first became empire. Rome didn't fall, its money did. At its peak, Rome commanded land, labor, and trade across 3 continents. Roads functioned, ports moved goods, taxes were collected, What failed was not capacity, but coordination. For centuries, the Roman denarius was trusted across the empire, not because of imperial decree, but because of its silver content. Value was embedded in the coin itself. As military costs expanded and political instability grew, that constraint became inconvenient. The response was subtle. The silver content was reduced, slightly at first, then again, and again. What looked like a technical adjustment was a structural shift. By the 3rd century, the denarius contained a fraction of its original silver. Coins still circulated, wages were still paid, but prices no longer reflected reality. As trust weakened, merchants adjusted. They raised prices, they demanded payment in kind, they refused long-term contracts. Inflation followed, not as theory, but as lived experience. Eventually, money stopped coordinating the economy. Barter returned. Local exchange replaced imperial trade. The empire still existed on maps, but economically, it fragmented. Rome did not collapse in a single moment. It hollowed out. Once currency could no longer store value or signal price, the system lost its nervous system. Production declined. Tax revenue shrank. Central authority weakened. This was not a moral failure. It was mechanical. Money had been repurposed from a measure of value to a tool of survival. That decision solved short-term pressure. It guaranteed long-term decay. Rome revealed a lesson every later empire would relearn. When monetary integrity is compromised, complexity reverses. Spain would repeat this pattern, not by reducing silver but by drowning in it. Silver riches became Spain's poison. In the 16th century, Spain controlled the largest flow of precious metals the world had ever seen. Silver from the Americas poured into Europe. In theory, this should have made Spain permanently wealthy. Instead, it weakened the empire. The problem was not greed, it was incentives. Easy money replaced productive discipline. Domestic industry stagnated, imports surged, prices rose across the empire. This became known as the price revolution, sustained inflation driven by monetary abundance, not scarcity. As costs increased, the crown faced a familiar dilemma. Military commitments expanded, administrative expenses grew, tax revenues lagged behind. Rather than reforming its economic base, Spain borrowed heavily. Future silver shipments were pledged to finance present obligations, debt stacked upon debt. By the late 16th century, Spain had defaulted multiple times. The irony was precise. An empire rich in money became poor in production. Silver distorted prices, it weakened exports, it rewarded consumption over creation. As confidence eroded, lenders demanded higher premiums, capital became expensive, flexibility disappeared. Spain still possessed vast territory, it still commanded armies, but economically, it was hollow. The wealth that arrived without effort removed the pressure to adapt. This is the quiet danger of monetary abundance. When money becomes easier to acquire than productivity, discipline fades. Spain's decline was not sudden. It was slow, bureaucratic, and administrative. Its currency did not collapse overnight. It simply lost credibility as a store of value. The empire continued to exist, but its influence steadily retreated. Spain demonstrated a second principle of monetary decay. Debasement is not the only path to collapse. Abundance can be just as destructive. Britain would follow the same trajectory. Not through excess silver, but through credit. Credit was empire, until it wasn't. Britain did not lose power through invasion or collapse. It lost it through balance sheets. By the 19th century, the British pound was the backbone of global trade. London was the world's financial center. British credit financed railways, ports, and governments across continents. Trust in the pound allowed Britain to project power far beyond its physical size. But credit cuts both ways. 2 world wars changed the arithmetic. Military expenditures exploded. Reconstruction costs followed. Britain emerged victorious and deeply indebted. To sustain obligations, gold convertibility was suspended. The pound was devalued. Foreign creditors adjusted expectations. What mattered was not the policy itself, but the signal it sent. Britain could no longer defend its currency without constraint. As debt accumulated, maintaining the empire required continuous borrowing. Confidence thinned. Capital began to seek safer anchors. The retreat was gradual. Trade still functioned. Institutions remained intact. The empire did not vanish overnight, but the pound slowly lost its role as the world's reserve currency. This monetary shift preceded the geopolitical one. By the time Britain formally withdrew from its colonies, the financial center of gravity had already moved. The lesson is precise. Empires do not surrender power when they lose battles. They surrender power when creditors lose faith. Debt transformed Britain's currency from a store of stability into a lever of obligation. Once that happens, choices narrow. Policies become reactive. Flexibility disappears. Britain remained a nation. It remained influential. But it was no longer dominant. Credit had built the empire. Credit dismantled it. This pattern did not end with Britain. Debt dynamics do not respect borders, eras, or political systems. The same pressures now operate on a far larger scale, and they do not exempt modern America. In 1971, the dollar chose freedom, not stability. Until that moment, the global monetary system still had an anchor. Imperfect, restrictive, but real. Under Bretton Woods, the dollar was convertible to gold for foreign governments. That constraint limited how far monetary expansion could go. As United States spending rose, driven by war, social programs, and global commitments, the system strained. Foreign holders began exchanging dollars for gold. Reserves drained. Pressure mounted. The response was framed as temporary. In practice, it was permanent. When convertibility ended, the dollar became a pure fiat currency. Its value now rested entirely on confidence. This shift changed incentives. Without an external constraint, deficits became easier to finance. Spending no longer required immediate trade-offs. Debt filled the gap between political promises and economic reality. This was not reckless in isolation. It was gradual, systemic. For decades, the arrangement appeared stable. Global demand for dollars remained strong. Trade expanded. Financial markets deepened. But the nature of the system had changed. Money was no longer primarily a measure of value. It became a policy tool. Each crisis justified expansion. Each expansion normalized the next. Over time, debt replaced revenue as the primary stabilizer. Borrowing substituted for productivity. Asset prices rose faster than wages. This is not unique to the United States. It is characteristic of late-stage monetary dominance. Reserve currencies buy time, not immunity. As long as trust holds, the system functions. But the structure becomes increasingly sensitive to confidence. When credibility is questioned, adjustments accelerate. America's monetary shift did not signal collapse. It signaled a change in trajectory. And in every empire that followed this path, the next stage was unavoidable. Debt eventually becomes the engine and the burden. Debt solves problems today, but creates collapse tomorrow. In every empire, debt begins as a convenience. Then it becomes a necessity. Borrowing allows governments to smooth shocks, to fight wars, to fund expansion, and, to delay hard choices. At first it works. Growth continues, markets adapt, confidence remains intact. But debt changes behavior. When spending is no longer limited by revenue, discipline weakens. Costs are postponed. Consequences are deferred. Debt becomes the default response, not the last resort. Over time, servicing obligations replaces investing in productivity. Resources flow toward maintaining the system rather than improving it. This is the quiet acceleration phase. The system appears stable precisely because debt absorbs pressure. Reforms can be delayed, imbalances can persist, but the underlying structure deteriorates. As debt grows, the margin for error shrinks. Small disruptions require larger interventions. Stability demands constant expansion. Eventually, trust shifts. Creditors begin to ask different questions. Not whether debts will be paid, but how. Through growth, through inflation, through devaluation. At this point, debt stops being neutral. It becomes a signal. Rising debt communicates that future output has already been claimed, that promises exceed capacity, that money is being asked to do more than just measure value. This erodes confidence, subtly at first. Interest rates become sensitive, capital becomes cautious, policy becomes reactive. Debt also reshapes incentives internally. Short-term stabilization is rewarded, long-term sustainability is postponed. The system becomes fragile, not because of one decision, but because of accumulated dependency. Every late-stage empire reaches this moment. Debt no longer supports the system. It defines it. And when debt defines money, trust begins to thin. Because really, the problem is no longer numerical, it is psychological. Debt alters belief, and belief is the foundation of currency. Prices reveal what officials deny. Inflation is not an opinion, it is a signal. When money loses integrity, prices adjust before narratives do. They reflect pressures that policy attempts to conceal. In the early stages, inflation is dismissed, labeled as temporary, or, attributed to shocks or supply constraints. But when it persists, its meaning changes. Sustained inflation tells us that money is no longer a reliable measure of value. It no longer coordinates effort across time. Savings are punished, while consumption is rewarded. Planning, it becomes difficult. This isn't accidental. Inflation reduces the real burden of debt. It quietly transfers purchasing power. It resolves political constraints without an explicit default. Historically, this mechanism appears again and again. Rome inflated by debasement, Spain inflated by abundance, Britain inflated through post-war adjustment. The method changes, but the effect does not. As prices rise, behavior shifts. Households spend faster, businesses shorten contracts, investors chase assets rather than yield. These adaptations stabilize the system for a while, but honestly they weaken it structurally. Inflation erodes trust asymmetrically. Those closest to money creation adjust first. Wages lag behind. Savings suffer. This creates tension, not dramatic unrest, but a kind of quiet disengagement. People stop believing prices reflect reality. They stop trusting money as a store of effort. At this stage, inflation isn't the core problem anymore, it's the messenger. The deeper issue is credibility. Once prices are expected to rise, confidence becomes unstable, expectations harden, reversals require increasingly forceful intervention. History shows that sustained inflation is not resolved by reassurance. It ends through structural change, or sometimes crisis. But inflation alone doesn't break a system. Many societies have endured it for years. The system fails when confidence in money itself begins to fracture. And that fracture, well, it follows a familiar pattern. Currency fails when people stop believing in it. Not all at once, not publicly, but decisively. Loss of confidence doesn't look like panic at first. It looks like adjustment. Foreign holders diversify reserves, contracts get shorter, trade terms quietly change. Domestic savers behave differently. They hold less cash, move faster, and seek anything that feels more stable than money itself. None of this requires collapse, just doubt. Confidence in currency is binary in theory, but gradual in practice. It fades in layers. The most informed actors move first. Institutions adjust next. The public responds last. By the time headlines finally acknowledge the shift, it's already embedded. This stage is where history converges. Rome's merchants demanded goods instead of coin. Spanish creditors demanded higher premiums. British lenders priced risk into sterling. The pattern is consistent. Money still circulates, but it is no longer trusted. At this point, policy options narrow. Restoring confidence requires sacrifice, austerity, default, or discipline. Most systems choose delay. Controls replace reform. Narratives replace signals. Capital restrictions appear. Pricing rules tighten. Complexity increases to mask simplicity. These measures buy time, but spend credibility. Confidence cannot be legislated. Once money is seen as unstable, every participant becomes defensive. Trust becomes local. Time horizons shrink. The system enters a self-reinforcing loop. The more authorities act to preserve confidence, the more their actions signal fragility. This isn't collapse, it's convergence. Across centuries, empires reach this stage with remarkable similarity. Different currencies, different institutions, same psychology. And once belief fractures, the final stage is no longer a matter of choice, it's a matter of sequence. What always happens next isn't debated. Once confidence breaks, systems don't recover by persuasion, they reorganize. History offers no examples of a dominant currency regaining unquestioned trust after this stage without structural rupture. Not Rome, not Spain, not Britain. What follows isn't always dramatic, but it is always decisive. Money loses its role as neutral ground. Economic coordination fragments. The center weakens. Some systems choose an explicit reset. Debts are restructured. Currencies are replaced. Others choose gradual erosion. Controls tighten. Standards slip. Complexity masks decline. The outcome differs in form, not in function. The old monetary order ends. A new one emerges, smaller, more constrained, and less trusted. This isn't failure, it's transition. Empires rarely disappear at this point. They persist, politically, culturally, militarily. But their monetary dominance does not. And monetary dominance is what allowed scale in the first place. Once that's gone, influence contracts. This is why history is so consistent. The pattern doesn't care about intentions. It doesn't negotiate with politics. It responds to incentives and trust. Those who understand this stage aren't surprised by what follows. They recognize the signs. They adjust expectations. They stop asking whether reversal is possible and start observing how transition unfolds. This knowledge doesn't grant control. It grants clarity. Every empire believed it could pause the sequence. None did. Because this is not a story about failure. It's a story about limits, and history enforces them, quietly, patiently, and without exception. Collapse isn't fate, it's consequence. History is often misunderstood at this point. Empires aren't punished, they're processed. Once monetary trust is lost, systems don't reverse course through willpower or policy. They reorganize. This reorganization follows limits, not intentions. Debts that can't be honored are restructured, formally or silently. Currencies that can't be trusted are replaced, directly or indirectly. Institutions that relied on scale contract to what confidence can support. This isn't collapse in the cinematic sense. It's compression. Complex systems simplify when trust disappears. Long supply chains shorten, central authority weakens, local coordination becomes more important than global reach. Rome fragmented economically before it fragmented politically. Spain receded financially before it retreated territorially. Britain lost monetary primacy before it lost empire. In each case, leaders sought restoration, stability, normalcy. None achieved it. Because monetary credibility isn't restored by decree. It's earned, slowly, under constraint. And constraint is exactly what late-stage systems lack. This is why reversals are so rare. The tools used to preserve the old order undermine the conditions required to rebuild trust. More control signals fragility. More intervention signals dependence. So, history moves forward, not back. The system that emerges is smaller, less ambitious, more limited, but also more aligned with reality. This isn't judgment, it's mechanics. Understanding this changes perspective. It shifts focus away from prediction, away from timing, away from narratives, and towards structure. Those who understand the pattern don't wait for collapse. They recognize transition. They aren't alarmed. They aren't surprised. They simply stop expecting the past to return. This is the quiet advantage history offers. Not certainty, clarity. Because once you understand what always happens next, you no longer mistake consequence for catastrophe. History doesn't repeat, it rhymes. Understand the pattern.